Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Health Talk. It is, again, sponsored by Providence Health and Services, Western Montana. And John King, good morning, sir.
Hey, good morning, Peter. How are you doing?
Fantastic. Did you go fishing on the first weekend of fishing season?
No, I did not go fishing.
You have those three gorgeous little kids, and you didn't take them out on the river?
Well, the
What?
three little gorgeous kids can go fishing down at the little stock pond here in town. And we did that last week.
You did. Okay. There you go. All right. Well, we have a special guest in studio. It's Dr. Randale Sechrest. He's a Chief Medical Informatics Officer at Providence Health and Services. Randy, good morning and welcome, sir.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So tell me a little bit about you, about how long you've obviously you're a medical doctor, and when did you get involved in the whole medical records part of medicine?
You know, I've been involved in medical records for a long time, probably more than 2 decades. In my current role here in Providence, I've been doing this work for the last 4 years. So I actually retired from medical practice and actually took this work on full time.
Oh, wow. What kind of medical doctor were you before?
I was an orthopedic surgeon.
Oh, wow. Now, 2 decades is a long time for informatics, isn't it? I mean, it was probably just kind of in its infancy when you were starting.
Well, it's interesting. You know, I actually started my practice, in the Indian Health Service over in Browning, Montana, back in the early 80s. And then I came back to Montana based on that experience and spent 12 years up in Libby, Montana as an orthopedic surgeon. And it's there where I really sort of got the urge, sort of the passion for clinical informatics, because the internet was just becoming a big thing back in the 90s, and I was actually practicing in Libby, Montana. And the minute I saw the internet, I realized what this could do for rural physicians. And from that point forward, it was just a passion of mine to try to involve other physicians in the use of the internet, use of information technology, and all the things that could do for us as physicians.
So is Montana kind of an early adopter because of your headway on this?
Well, I like to think so, but I think that the world has moved a lot faster than Montana. So we may have been early adopters, but I think we're playing catch up to some degree now.
Now, Randy, one thing that intrigues me is what you said about working in a rural atmosphere. It's got to be really difficult for folks that are, especially healthcare professionals in rural areas, to try to communicate, especially when they have a patient with a difficult diagnosis, to try to communicate with a larger hospital like St. Pat's or perhaps Billings or whatever, and try to relate to them the various things that they're seeing rather than just a phone call or a fax. So is that really what all these medical records technologies are all about?
I think that he is. I think that the early sort of modalities of EHR, and I'm going to stop and just take a step back and give you an example. Imagine me sitting in Libby, Montana with an x-ray and a patient in the ER, and I'm trying to transfer that patient, for example, to Missoula. And I'm sitting on the phone trying to describe what I'm seeing on the x-ray to the person that I'm trying to actually refer that patient to. Today, all I have to do is send that picture. And a picture's worth 1,000 words, as people say, and now I can instantaneously send everything I'm seeing, in addition to a live video feed if necessary, to be able to show that other physician on the other end of the line what I'm faced with and get that person to help me make critical decisions.
I'm really curious. My wife said, when he gets to the studio, make sure you ask him what meaningful use means. What is that term? What does it play in the whole Epic system?
Well, part of the problem is, as you probably know, healthcare is the last industry to actually digitize its processes. So we've been through this with travel, we've been through it with finance, we've been through it. You can now buy a home, you can buy a car over the internet, never even have to be there. Healthcare has lagged behind. And to stimulate acceleration of adoption of digital healthcare, the government actually, as part of Obamacare, put in incentives for providers to actually adopt the EHR. So there were literally billions of government dollars pushed into the healthcare industry and said, if you do this with your EHR, if you buy an EHR, and second, you can't just buy it. You have to use it in a meaningful way. The government basically established a 3-step process for providers to say, if you're using the EHR in what we consider a meaningful way, we will subsidize your purchase.
That's electronic health records.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Now, what is exactly Epic? Is that an acronym, or is it just a brand name, or what?
Epic is primarily a brand name. There are literally hundreds of different electronic health record systems, and most of those are for single practices of small numbers of physicians. Epic is one of the what we call enterprise electronic health records, and that means it is modeling the complete healthcare system. So it's used in hospitals, it's used in offices, it is used in the ER, it's used in radiology, it's used across the healthcare enterprise. So it's really designed for hospitals, very large hospitals, and very large health systems.
And you were saying there were 3 ways that the government sees as meaningful use of systems like Epic. What are those 3 ways, and are there ways that we're using it that are also meaningful that you think the government should consider?
Yeah, I think that when I say 3 ways, there were 3 waves of very specific targets that you hit. For example, one is as a physician, did you talk to the patient about stopping smoking? So you need to record that in the HR. Now, that's a trivial sort of thing when you think about it, but if you think about practices that aren't used to actually recording that data and putting it in a digital platform like an EHR, it's a big step. So there's levels of different EHR use, all the way up to the point where can you electronically transfer information on a patient from one hospital to the other and show us how you did that 5% of the time. So that's a measure.
5% of the time?
Just to get started, let's say.
Okay.
Now we're moving into the third level, which is much more complex, and quite frankly, meaningful use has probably reaching the end of its useful lifetime. And the government now is focused on a more critical underlying concept, and that's interoperability. You know, the internet works because people can talk to anybody across the world, and that's what essentially interoperability is. We still have barriers between hospitals in terms of being able to have one EHR talk to another. So the government understands this and basically says, we're going to drive interoperability as our next meaningful use scenario.
Our guest is Dr. Randale Sechrest, and he is the Chief Informatics Officer, Medical Records Officer for Providence Health and Service. This is Health Talk. Now, when we come back, Randy, I want to ask you about security, because that's the one thing that when people started talking about, oh gosh, my health records are going to be online, oh my goodness, there's all sorts of outcry. But I'm sure that amazing steps have been taken to protect this information. I want to find out about that when we come back. And we'll be right back with more of Health Talk right after this. And of course, I'm always the last to know. I'm mispronouncing our guest's name, and I feel terrible about that. Randale Sechrest. Right? Is that right? Did I get it right this
Correct.
time?
Randale Sechrest.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Thank you for joining us. And now that we know who you really are, can we talk a little bit about security? Because I'm sure that when the medical records, it was known that we're going to be online and the internet, there was a hue and cry, well, what about security, our safety? Because these are extremely personal and private records. So how can you help us out with that?
Well, I think we're all concerned about security, and I think that we're concerned about security not just for health information, but imagine our financial information. Same situation.
Sure.
So I think that for the last 20 years, we have struggled with this problem about what's the correct amount of security, encryption, those sorts of things, versus the convenience and the benefits of this information being digital first and then online on a network. And I think that one of the things about healthcare information is because we've come to the party late, we have the benefits of a lot of bad experience across the other industries.
Learn from other people's mistakes.
We did.
Yeah.
So I think that one is the HIPAA governmental regulations are extremely strict in terms of penalties and in terms of how we go about securing healthcare information of individual patients. I think this is more than we've ever had before. I think we tended to think that our paper records were very secure, but they were only secure because they weren't on a network. They were probably less secure in the physician's office if anybody really wanted to get to them. So I think that from that standpoint, the healthcare information, it's really always a balance between the benefits of making it available and the benefits of me having my physician have the ability to transfer all of my medical information to a referring physician instantaneously. For example, if I'm in an emergency room somewhere in rural Montana, as I described earlier, that's a huge benefit. And that benefit has to be weighed against what are the chances of our information getting accessed. I think we all know that information and intrusions are occurring everywhere. They're occurring in the retail sector, they're occurring in the banking sector, and now they're occurring in the healthcare sector. So I think that's a problem we're going to continue to grapple with, continue to ratchet down, and I think that, again, it's always looking at those risk benefits of what we're getting in the mix.
It's my understanding that Epic, the system that you work with directly, has medical records on something like more than 40% of all Americans, is a huge percentage of Americans' health records. My question is this: with HIPAA laws and all this data, is it possible to tap into the metadata in a useful way to find out maybe common trends or ways that we're being affected or diseases are hitting us that we might not be able to see in particular at a location like a particular hospital, but we might be able to see in the grand view of things?
Well, this is the holy grail of what we call big data in healthcare. And I think that some of you may have seen the announcement 2 weeks ago, I think, that IBM with its Watson program has now partnered with 14 major medical facilities across the U.S. And the whole goal is to try to aggregate data on cancer patients. Now, this is de-identified data, which means that it is not data that's traceable back to you, but all of that metadata that you're talking about, all of the functional information about the disease process is being aggregated and used to make diagnosis better and better and better. So that's happening today, and it's accelerating.
So does Watson tap into systems like Epic to get its information?
Yes, and there's multiple different sources of information, and the EHR, the electronic health record, is just one of those sources. You're even seeing people now on the internet join up with websites like Patients Like Me, which is genetic information. It's not even a healthcare facility, but it's a web company that's actually aggregating this data based on patients wanting to give them the data. So you're going to see more and more of this in the future, I think.
Wow. Now, with Watson, just so people know, we kind of referred to it, this is kind of a diagnostic program. I've heard that it was able to help treat patients better than 70% of doctors or some crazy statistic like that, right? But it's just software.
Well, it is. It's more than software, probably. You might recall IBM Watson first beat the Grandmaster at chess. Second,
it was Deep Blue at the time.
Correct.
Same system? Okay.
Same system. Then it went to Jeopardy, took on three of I think it was Kenneth Jennings.
Yeah, the grand champions,
right? Yes. So they took on three of those and beat those. And the next move was into taking this system and turning it on healthcare. So that's one of the big focuses for IBM right now. What they're calling it now is cognitive computing.
Wow.
And really that's another piece of taking lots of data, big data we call it, and then running algorithms and machine learning to let Watson learn from the patterns. Physicians primarily are pattern matchers, and computers do that better than we do.
So our Missoula patients, are their data being used to help drive Watson?
No, not at this point. They are not. To my knowledge, that database of Missoula patients is not included in those 14 major institutions. These are primarily academic centers right now.
I see.
Now let me ask you this. Let's say I'm an extraordinarily disgustingly healthy person, and I haven't been to a doctor for 5, 6, 10 years. Whatever. I go in to get a checkup. Are my old medical records from the time that I was a mere youth up until today, have they already been entered into Epic, or are they already there, or are they just in some dusty folder somewhere?
A little of both.
Okay.
We do something we call data migration when we move into an electronic health record. And you have to realize that we're taking a paper-based industry and now migrating it into an electronic industry and a digital industry.
That's a lot of data. That's a lot of data.
That's a
entry,
huge
right?
amount of data.
Yeah.
So what we do is we try to pick and choose what data from your health history we want to put into Epic when we sort of bring it up from scratch. So things like immunizations are very important. Things like this guy had penicillin at age 10 for a
ear infection.
ear infection
Right.
is not that important.
Right.
Unless perhaps you are allergic to it.
Right, there you go. So we're up against a break, so go ahead, John. Did you have
Well, when we get back, I'm really curious about how we're using this system here in Missoula. You listed a whole bunch of possible uses earlier and some future uses, and I was kind of hoping you could tell us where we're at now and where we hope to be in the next couple of years.
Yeah, this is Health Talk. We'll continue with more right after this quick timeout. We're back on Health Talk, a presentation of Providence Health and Services, Western Montana. Peter Christian, John King, and we're talking with Dr. Randale Sechrest, who's with us. He is the Chief Informatics Officer at Providence Health and Services. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, before the break, I was asking basically how we're using all this technology here locally in Montana, specifically in Missoula, and what you think we'll be trying to do with it in the near future.
Well, I think right now we're at the point where we're just getting the platform in place and stable. So this was a huge endeavor to try to get people who were used to dealing with medical records on paper and get all the systems functioning to the point where they're good, reliable systems that we can depend on. I think we are starting to dip our toe into the analytics piece of taking our information and automating some of the diagnostics and things like watching our patients for the signs of sepsis in the ICU, for example. One of the things that Epic does very well is looks at patterns, as we said, and there are algorithms running in the background so that if you come in the hospital and you're have an infection, for example, a renal infection, a kidney infection in the ED, Epic begins to monitor you, and if you're put in the ICU for any reason, the data is constantly monitored, and Epic, the algorithm that's running, can actually predict, usually 8 hours before a patient becomes septic, which means the infection spreads across their body. There are little patterns that Epic can pick up, and we can actually predict that. So it's being used now to predict issues.
Now, I think a lot of the importance on how the system works well, if it's going to work well, is the inputs. So is information being fed into the system by the devices in the hospital room, or is it being input by a doctor or both, or by a nurse practitioner or something? How does the information get into Epic?
All of those things. I think that right now the concept of a sensor that picks up information can be a blood pressure cuff that's on constantly, a pulse meter or an oxygen meter, but a sensor is also the nurse that walks in and makes an assessment and puts information in the chart. A sensor is also a physician who does some synthesis of a physical exam and puts that in the chart. Those become data points in the EHR.
So was there a little bit of old dog, new tricks sort of thing? I mean, I assume you've got a lot of professionals, highly intelligent people working in a hospital. Having to learn how to work with the internet in a new way might not have been the easiest thing to do, though.
There is a whole lot of old dog, new tricks.
There's a learning curve. Yeah. Now, can you explain? I wanted to ask you. There's a term here that I hadn't seen before. What is MyChart?
MyChart is the portal, the patient portal that's attached to Epic. And just like you have your banking app or your travel app or anything that you use to access a service, that's what MyChart is to Epic. So
now let me ask you this. Is MyChart, does that mean me, Peter Christian, can go onto MyChart and see what my medical records are, or is that for the doctors?
No, this is MyChart is for the patient.
Oh, okay.
And it can be accessed from home. And right now you can see portions like labs and that sort of stuff of your medical chart, and you can see portions of your medical chart. There's a move afoot across the country to essentially, it's called Open Chart, to really allow physicians to see everything or patients to see everything. That hasn't occurred yet, but I think we're moving in that direction.
We have exactly like 50 seconds before we're done. So if folks want to get more information about what you do, Randale, is there a website or something that we could get more information?
Well, I think the Providence website has a significant amount of information for patients about how we're using Epic and how we're transitioning the new version of healthcare into the 21st century.
Perfect. Thanks so much for being with us. A fountain of information. We appreciate it very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
All right. That's going to do it for this week's edition of Health Talk. Hope you'll join us next week as it's brought to you by Providence Health and Services, Western Montana. And we have, of course, another hour of talk back yet to come, visiting with Dave Galt from the Montana Petroleum Association. We'll be back after this top of the hour timeout. Welcome, everybody. It's hour number 2 of Talkback, underway now, brought to you by Bitterroot Motors, where they've been doing it right for more than 42 years. Office solutions and services, locally owned solutions for every office, the Mustard Seat Restaurant, Automotive Cutting Edge, where Joe Featherly and the mechanics specialize in all makes and models, vehicle repair and maintenance, 542-2218, and by Transport Equipment, your headquarters for RV service, maintenance, and repair just south of the Y. Call 541-9097. Okay, welcome back, everybody, and we are shifting gears, quite literally, if you want to talk about, we're going to talk about oil and petroleum and good stuff like that.
Yeah, we have a fractastic conversation lined up today. We're going to be speaking with Dave Galt. He's the executive director of the Montana Petroleum Association, and you probably recognize his voice if you listen to our newscasts. I did a story with him, oh boy, I guess it was 3 or 4 weeks ago, about a fascinating change in Montana's oil industry, particularly the disappearance of these giant rigs that drill these horizontal drilling. Not pipes, but the little tunnels down into the ground.
Sure.
And anyway, so Dave is on the air with us right now, and kind of give us a little quick of a look at what's going on in the industry and how Montana's faring. So, first up, Dave, we have all seen oil prices kind of drop, and I guess they're steadily kind of going back up now, but where are we now as far as dealing with the changes in the oil market?
I think Montana's still pretty slow. We haven't seen any activity regenerating itself in eastern Montana yet. We are watching price. That certainly is the component that's put our business a little on the slower side lately. So right now in Montana, there are 0 large rigs working. I haven't seen one come back into the state yet. So activity in Montana is slow.
And could you explain what that means in the future? And what is a rig? And also, if we are not drilling now, what will happen and how will it affect us in the near future?
Yeah, especially Montana's economy.
Right. I think, and when I start talking too much, you guys just say, whoa.
You can't talk too much on Talkback. Go ahead and try, though.
We use the number of rigs as kind of a bellwether for the activity going on in Montana at a time. And when I use the term rig, we're usually talking about the large rigs that drill deep horizontal wells, whether they're gas or oil. Most of these would be in eastern Montana. So we've, a rig these days can drill probably 10 wells a year. So, we've had 10 to 13 rigs running in Montana for the past 4 years, and we've seen our oil production steadily climb back toward the peak that we had in 2006. And wells naturally decline, so if you're not drilling new wells, you're going to start to see that production, oil production and gas production start to decline. So, tax revenue, for example, let's talk a little bit about that. Oil gas production taxes that usually run around $250 million a year are going to start to fall off. They're a function of price and production levels. So prices, we all know, is down, and production levels will probably start to follow this summer. And
Wow.
we'll see lower production, and then some mitigation because prices are coming up a little bit. But in the long term, each rig adds a lot of opportunity for jobs in Montana, probably about 30 jobs, and each new well produces for quite a while, actually. So by not having any new wells going on, it's a bigger hit than just a loss of production tax revenue. It's the loss of jobs and the corresponding support that goes along with those with that activity.
I think now would be a good time to explain how much one well produces for Montana. You were talking a little bit about property taxes and stuff, but I know there's been studies that your industry's had some involvement with that kind of show the amount of revenue generated by one particular well.
Well, we do have some economic analysis that's been done by Dr. Ricard out of Montana State University Billings, their Applied Center for Economic Research. And one of the things that he talked about was the benefit of a new well, and it would support an additional 11 jobs and $665,000 in new wages just to Montana drilling and extraction workers. But when you look at that as a larger economic picture, the additional productive well increases Montana's gross output by $9 million, adds $3.6 million to Montana's GDP, and produces an additional $1.5 million in wages while supporting 33 additional jobs. So it's a big deal, not only in production tax revenue, but in the linked jobs, truck drivers, suppliers of all kinds of products, sand, material, steel, fuel, fire retardant clothes, medical supplies, all kinds of things that go into an active oil and gas industry.
Okay, Dave, we're going to take a little break. When we come back, though, I want to ask you if you, along with the other petroleum associations that are especially involved in the Bakken, if you are feeling targeted and have been for the last several years by what's going on in Saudi Arabia and OPEC as they're trying to basically force you guys to stop drilling to keep the price of oil low. So that to run you guys out of business, they can get it back up again. So I want to ask you about that and what the global oil market looks like from your point of view, and we come right back. Hey, we're back. It's the Monday edition of Talk Back. Dave Galt joining us, Executive Director of the Montana Petroleum Association. And Dave, I asked you a question before the break. Does the Montana Petroleum Association and perhaps North Dakota and Wyoming and the others, are you feeling, do you know for a fact that your area, especially in the Bakken, has been targeted by OPEC trying to run you guys out of business so they can get the price back up?
I don't think I can say that I know that for a fact, but I think that, if you look at increased U.S. production over the last 5 or 6 years and the fact that the United States has become the leading oil producer in the world, I am positive, just in my mind, that that's had a significant wake-up call across the world to places like OPEC and Russia and Africa and other parts of the world that are oil-producing countries. And certainly OPEC has increased its production, and it's been steady. It's refused to cut its production. So, oil is oversupplied in the market right now, and I think that's the significant factor that led to the price decline starting last fall.
Interesting. One of the things I wanted to ask you, I was reading a story about, I think it's Statoil was doing some testing in their wells down in Texas, and they were changing the makeup of what they were shooting under the ground to frack, and had radically, despite a decrease in the number of wells, had radically improved the amount of production on their wells. And I was wondering if there's experimentation going on like that in Montana with our wells, and whether or not we might be able to drive more of the oil out of the ground with the existing wells than we might, and maybe that means we don't need to have as many rigs running.
Well, I'm not familiar with what Statoil and the article you're talking about and what they're doing down in Texas, but I do know that I think that's one of the success stories of the oil and gas industry, is the fact that technology is always advancing and we're always trying new ideas. So when you talk about getting more oil out of the ground, let's just veer off on that a little bit. So when you're drilling a primary, the first well, when you're drilling that first well, you're probably going to get 16 to 18% of the oil in place. I mean, that's just a kind of an industry benchmark. You're only going to get a fraction of that. And then as those wells age and you can apply some kind of secondary recovery methods, you might get another 15% of that oil in place out of the ground. And then when you move to tertiary recovery, which is usually in my mind thinking about the introduction of CO2 and enhanced oil recovery into the ground, you're going to pick up another 20 or 25% of that oil in place. So those oil wells last a long time. Those fields last a long time. They never necessarily, I'm not aware of you getting all of the oil out of the ground. So there's always advancing technology to try to make it better. And Montana is unique in the sense that it has a lot of legacy oil wells. It has activity going on in Richland County in the northeast corner that's primary production. It has activity going on in Fallon County, kind of central eastern Montana, central north and south, but on the eastern edge of the state, where we're in secondary production levels. In a little field in southeast Montana where we've actually introduced CO2 and we're doing enhanced oil recovery with plans in the future. So the answer to your question is technology is always evolving. The idea of peak oil, that we're going to hit it, those predictions have been proven false for 50 years. So it's really a factor of technology advancing and doing a better job removing the oil in place.
But you just answered the question I was going to ask it, and that was many years ago. There was this prediction that oil's going to run out. There's a finite supply, and so we're going to have to start working on various other kinds of energy because we're just going to run out of oil. It's going to be tremendously expensive. But it just seems like the exact opposite has occurred.
That's exactly correct. And I don't know how many times the peak oil date has moved forward. It's kind of like a rolling target. But we've always adopted an all-of-the-above energy policy, but certainly for transportation fuels, crude oil and petroleum, gasoline, and diesel fuel are what generates and motivates the world, and I don't see that changing in the near future.
There was some news a couple weeks ago, apparently a big shock for many people that look at the industry. The production levels in the United States were way down, below expectations. And if you have this for too long, obviously it's going to drive up the price, it seems to me. So my question for you is this. We have 0 rigs working now, which means that as these wells time out and decrease in the amount that they're able to produce, when that point happens, there's going to be a period of time, it seems to me, unless we start drilling again, that we're going to want to get oil out of the ground but won't be able to because we don't have the wells in place. Is that something that's likely to happen, or is it pretty easy to stand these up and get going if we need to?
Well, that's a big question, and I wouldn't use the term "it is likely to happen," and I wouldn't use the term "it's easy to get started again." I mean that's a dilemma that the oil industry faced in the '80s, where rigs laid down, the industry started to slow down. There were huge reduction in employee workforces. People that had the training and the technology and the skill sets to do the engineering and the advancement took other jobs, moved into other career fields, and I think that's a huge concern for industry now. I mean, we've watched layoffs occur in the industry, both from rig hands to engineering and senior management. I mean, it's not just one side of the industry that's visualizing and experiencing layoffs right now, and that's a serious concern. If you cut your talent. I mean, it's about the people, and if you cut that talent and don't have it, it's hard to start back up again, because these are all smart folks. They're all hard-working folks, and they're going to find a job and find a means to take care of their family wherever they can. And maybe they just don't want to come back into the oil industry when they leave. And certainly that is a concern.
Dave, we're going to take a little break. Come right back. Now, when we come back from the break, I want to ask you about. I know that nobody's even mentioned the Keystone XL oil pipeline for several months. It's been quite a while. But I want to find out from you, from the Montana Petroleum Association, your view. Is that ever going to be built? I realize they've already made plans for it. And there have been such an outcry, a hue and cry, if you will, over oil trains, the train cars that are not specifically made or perhaps aren't as up to date as they could be to transport crude. There's a lot of blowback right now about they got to get those replaced, how expensive it's going to be. And basically, getting oil from one place to another has become a huge problem, and we want to find out how you feel about that when we come back.
Yeah, well, speaking of black gold, people talk about how valuable stuff can be, but on a Monday morning, the most important thing that you might have that's black would be a cup of coffee.
There you go.
And we are giving away free coffee and toast right now. Give us a call, 721-1290. This is from the Rocket Coffee stand in the Garden City Garden Supply. First caller, that's all you got to do is call. No answering questions. Don't even have to go live. Just call 721-1290 for a chance to win.